and welcome to Before the Bell, presented by Troy's Roofing and Construction in partnership with Sports Combat News. I'm your host, Brian Willett, and today on the show, we have an amateur MMA fighter with an upcoming bout on January 26th at the casino here in Moncton, New Brunswick. Please welcome Justin Ley. Justin, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Brian. Glad to be here, and hello to everyone.
No problem. So, Justin, on January 26th, you're going to face off against Cory Vern, whose record, I believe, is 2-1. So how are you preparing for that fight coming up?
Well, this camp, there's a lot new, a lot different. I'm feeling very optimistic, very strong going into this. I'm training more ever than in my whole life. I think I'm being more efficient as well, too. That's a big, big thing. So more time, more efficiency. I'm getting more done. I've got new components in my training camp. And, going into this, Cory's a local guy here as well. We're actually both from Fredericton. I've seen him fight. And I think I've got a very well-planned strategy on how we're going to be tackling him.
Oh, that's great. And you fight out of Evolution Fight and Fitness, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
So in your
head coach Andy Young.
So in your training camp, do you spend most of your time at Evolution Fight and Fitness, or do you move around a bit like other fighters?
I do move around a little bit, but Evolution is my primary training place. I do a little bit of jiu-jitsu at Synergy with Dana Dickinson and Melissa Hutchinson, I think? Yeah, sorry. Melissa at Synergy, and I do a little bit of wrestling with Clint.
That's awesome.
Kingsford.
And Justin, this will be your second time stepping into the octagon. I was there for that first fight when you went up against Francois Thibodeau, which unfortunately you lost in the second round. So I kind of want to talk about that, stepping into the octagon for the first time at the casino in front of that crowd. What does that feel like for you?
Honestly, it felt great. I felt very comfortable, very confident. A lot of people don't know, but I'm actually a musician as well too. I teach guitar and music at Long McQuaid. So I played in bands before, and I've been in front of audiences of thousands before even. So it was interesting because it's sort of a familiar feeling for me being on stage, but totally in a different light this time, obviously, with MMA. So yeah, I felt very comfortable, confident in front of everybody, and ready to showcase my ability. So
yeah, and you put on a great show in that fight. Unfortunately, it didn't go the way you expected, obviously. What from that first fight, stepping into the octagon in front of a crowd, you're comfortable in front of a crowd. What do you take out of that first fight that you build on for this upcoming fight in January?
I learned a lot. The whole thing was a great learning experience. They say you win, you learn, and I definitely walked away from this learning a lot more, and coming up to this fight, feel a lot more prepared. One of the biggest things I learned, we kind of planned. We'd heard that Frank was more of a striker dominantly, and so one mistake that I learned from certainly in this first camp was we kind of, after hearing that, started to tailor a little bit of my time around this and sort of allocating a lot more of my resources to striking and working standing counters. When in reality, he took me to the ground. It turns out he's a brown belt in judo and an amazing grappler. And so I had allocated a lot of my time from grappling. I was still doing a little grappling, but certainly not focusing on it. And that was definitely a big mistake. I feel now going into this camp, I'm training to be well balanced, and I'm just, I kind of have my allocations as to how much I'm devoting on striking versus grappling, and I'm not going to change that in any way, no matter what I hear about Cory or think I know about Cory. I'm just going to do my thing and train very hard and maintain that balance. I feel that that's very important, and that was a mistake I made last time, was to unbalance myself and reallocate some of my resources, and I just won't be doing that this time.
And you talk about, knowing a little bit about Frank and knowing a little bit about Cory and maybe seeing him in the octagon. And is that something that you and your coaches tend to do, is maybe watch footage of previous fights of your opponents, or do you, and you mentioned, trying to keep your own, game, on task. But is that something that you guys do a little bit to get to know them and see their weaknesses?
Absolutely, and I think a lot of people will do any sort of research among their opponents. I don't think that's sneaky in any way. I think that's just intelligent. But at the same token, it's one thing to watch these previous fights and become aware of certain things, but it's another to judge and sort of assume things. And that was the mistake I think I made. So in the future, while I will watch footage and become aware of certain things, I'm not going to assume anything. Again, that was, I feel, one of my biggest downfalls last fight was there was a lot I assumed, and I lost the fight. So
Yeah, so changing that up a little bit to less assumptions and really going in with Justin's game plan and not trying to tailor to what you think your opponents might be doing.
exactly. I'm just going to do my thing this time. I have a lot of fun in the ring, in sparring and in classes. And for me this time around, that's what it's going to be about. Not necessarily fun, but doing what I naturally do and not trying to overthink anything or plan anything that's unnatural, you know?
And so, you fight at 145. What is it, do you walk around at 145, or is that featherweight division kind of where you think your strengths really lie?
I feel that 145 is a great weight for me. I'm a pretty lean guy, so I naturally walk around, 160-ish. It depends if I'm eating healthy, if I'm training a lot, but generally that's my given weight, and I tend to be lean. The weight cut last time was a little bit of a struggle for me, and it was more so just a series of events being initially when I fought Frank, the fight was going to be scheduled for January, so it was basically where we are with this coming fight. But I think something happened. The card kind of folded, and then it got bumped to April. I had booked a vacation for March, and so these were non-refundable tickets. I do take fighting very seriously, but me and my girlfriend had this vacation plan. It was very important to us, so I had to take a little bit of time off and go on vacation. And I did maintain a good chunk of my diet. I was on a ketogenic diet, but I definitely cheated a little bit. When I came back from vacation, it was March maybe 12th or something. A month out from the fight, I was a little heavier than where I wanted to be. And I had to make some drastic changes in that month. It was exhausting, but I did manage to, recover quite a bit after the weigh-in day, and I felt very good the day of the fight. But that's something I'm not going to be doing again. This fight is there's no trips to Cuba in the middle of the training camp. So,
and I'm sure that's tough.
My weight is on point, and I'm doing very well, very confident, and again feeling strong at my weight.
And I'm sure that would be tough for any fighter. The card in January did get postponed until the April card that did take place. And I'm sure that's hard for any fighter who is cutting weight and trying to stay, to the diet and to the training plan, and then you get it pushed, those 3 extra months. Life gets in the way, and I'm sure you work. Do you work like as a regular daytime job to help support your fighting career?
Absolutely, yeah. Especially where I'm an amateur fighter. We don't really get paid from the organization, so. I teach music at Long McQuaid, and I've been doing that 6 years now. I have a history, I guess you'd say, in recording arts and music theory and music in general. So yeah, I work a full-time job and I train full-time. Like today, I'll be doing some cardio very soon when I'm done with you and have something more in my belly. And then I'll be off to do a little jiu-jitsu. And then I'll be off to do some yoga after that. And then I've got a full 8-hour day on top of that. So I am very busy now leading up to the fight. And very lucky to have the support from my friends and family and understanding from my friends and family that I'm in this time, the next 8 weeks, I'm going to be very busy. But that's what I choose to do, and they support me. So I'm very grateful.
And you talk about, you talk about your music life, if you will, your time at Long McQuaid. What made you choose to go into fighting and not pursue music further?
Well, I still dedicate a lot of time to pursuing music. Um, but for me, martial arts was actually always a big part of my life. I wrestled in middle school and high school. I had done some basic, like some taekwondo. I dabbled when I was younger with like aikido and sort of various forms of martial arts. Not very committed when I was younger. Wrestling, I was committed and I did compete a little bit. But in going into my adult life, that's kind of where my priorities changed. Of course, I had my mind set on a career within music, but it was honestly there was an event that occurred in my life that kind of re-triggered my passion for martial arts. That being, I was like involved in an altercation where I was basically randomly assaulted. Like sometimes you have altercations, maybe you've had a few drinks and somebody says something and you say something back. This wasn't that. This was just I was randomly assaulted, and my knowledge of martial arts enabled me to restrain the individual. He was dealt with legally, of course, and but I was able to avoid a very what could have been a very bad situation. This person really intended to hurt me physically for no known reason really to me. So it
Wow.
was a very big kind of wake up call, and I walked away from that going, wow, man, like I'm really glad I knew martial arts, and it kind of resparked my passion. So like within a couple weeks, I'd enrolled. My brother had been doing Muay Thai with Andy Young over at Evolution. This was years ago, and yeah, so I said, hey man, I'm going to come with you on the next class, and let's go from there. And here we are now.
Well, not a tragic event, obviously a scary event for you to take part in, and sparks that inner desire to fight again, or even to know more about fighting and how to defend yourself. So, and unfortunate that you had to go through that, and here we are today, and talking about your MMA career. So who knows where that could have led. But glad to have you on here talking about the things that led you to where you are, and obviously looking forward to see you in the octagon again. Justin, when we talk about the MMA career and what led you to where you are today, you say you are an amateur. What does it take to become pro? Like, is that a choice that a fighter makes? Like, you can say tomorrow, after Cory, you say, yeah, I choose to go pro because I want to be paid to do this, or is there a stipulation based on the commission that says you have to so many fights?
This is a great subject, and me and some friends were kind of talking about this this past weekend. It's an interesting term, amateur, when it comes to this sport of MMA, because there's nothing very amateur about it.
Mm.
That term amateur kind of gives one the idea that maybe this is a part-time gig, that this is something that, oh yeah, Justin's just doing this in the side for fun. It's his hobby. This is far from the reality. Within amateur MMA, you have guys who dedicate, I know personally how much time I dedicate, and it is another full-time job for me. It's a lifestyle. It's beyond a job. It's a lifestyle. It's something I've had to change my, dietary consumption, the way I eat, my time, things I'm thinking about outside of training all the time. It's a lifestyle. There's nothing amateur about it. That term amateur is just it's a way that we can sort of negate between a set of rules in my mind. In amateur MMA, you have a few exclusions, like you cannot knee an opponent in the face. You can't elbow, in the face. There's certain stipulations when you hit the ground. There's no leg locks. It's really almost like a separate sport within MMA. I do agree that there is a difference sometimes in the quality of amateur fighters versus professional fighters. But I would argue as well that that degree is not as big as one would assume, especially based on some other promotions. Elite One is an amazing promotion. I do see a difference between their amateur and professional fighters, but at the end of the day, this is almost up to the promotion. There have been other promotions in which I've spectated events where their professional fighters were more in line with amateur fighters of other organizations. To what degree the commission approves these, I'm not very certain on. But for me, I don't feel like I would go pro just yet. I definitely want a little more experience in this. Again, pro comes with a different set of rules. So when I do make that decision, it's definitely going to impact the way I train because we're going to be dealing with different rules. That's if you still train under amateur, obviously you're leaving yourself open for holes. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think amateur and pro, there's not as much difference if you're a good amateur. We'll put it that way. I think whether you're in this sport as an amateur or pro, you're dealing with massive lifestyle changes, and hopefully you're dedicating just as much time. I think that a professional, somebody in the professional division, is somebody who has been in the amateur. They've done a few fights. They've gotten the experience. They've become adapted to changing their lifestyle in this way. And I think that's what it equates to, honestly. It's just a little more experience. But again, it's very important to keep in mind that rule set change.
And I think that's interesting that you talk about those rule sets that are different from amateur and professional, because not a lot of people would know about that. Spectators who go to a show and know about an amateur side of the card and a professional side of the card would think it is just that, whether it's a status or a number of fights. But I don't think they would be aware of the different sets of rules. And obviously, like you said, it's a different style of training if you're an amateur because there are different rules. So you maybe take a different focus on what you can and can't do. So I appreciate you sharing that because I think, not a lot of people would know about that differences in those rules. So Justin, as we talk about, you are fighting on January 26th at the Elite One MMA Bitter Rivals card at Casino here in Moncton, New Brunswick against Cory Vern. Is there anything else that you want to add about that upcoming fight? Maybe stylistically, what are your expectations of the fight, and maybe some things like that before we head out?
Stylistically, I know Cory is very aggressive. He's very strong. And that's how I expect him to be in the ring. I think we're going to want to bang it out standing a bit. He's definitely a stand-up kind of guy. Him and I have talked a little bit. We're pretty friendly in communication, honestly. We both said, hey, man, I respect you, and we'll bang it out. We're going to make this entertaining for our friends and fans. That's really what it's all about. So I will be matching Cory's aggressiveness as well. And I think it's going to be a spectacle. He's known to be, his nickname's the Warrior. And from what I understand, posts he's made on Facebook, he's training just like one, and so am I. And we're going to throw down in that ring, and I'll be ready.
No, I think it's going to be amazing when January 26th comes and we, close the doors to the octagon and you and Cory face off and that bell rings for round one. I'm excited to see the sparks fly and to see what you guys put together. So before we take off, Justin, are there any sponsors or any shout outs that you'd like to make?
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. I've got a few sponsors here in town. One of them, I'm repping their logo right here. This is East Side. They've been a great sponsor. The owner, Brian Muir, hooked me up. Helping cover some of the fees involved with this stuff. Just something else I'd like to touch on regarding amateur versus pro, of course, is us as amateurs, we don't get paid, man. We have to pay for different licensing. We've got to pay for our coaches. We've got to pay for these dietary changes, and the funds simply aren't there. Often we're paying out of pocket for all these things. So having sponsors is a really big thing, I think, for amateur fighters. So shout out to my sponsors. I've got Eastside. I've also been talking to Digital World here in town. I've previously had Janot. They're a water supply company. Definitely hooked me up for my rehydrating process, we'll say, in my last fight. And Royal Barbershop. Rob Reese is the man here in town. If you want to get a nice style do here, you go see him. The Royal Barbershop, they'll give you the royal treatment.
Yeah, next time I'm in Fredericton, maybe I'll stop by and see what they can do with my style. I appreciate I appreciate those shout outs, Justin, and I'm sure sponsors, they obviously support you as an athlete and as a person. They know the type of athlete that you are and dedication that you have to this craft. So Justin, I thank you obviously for joining us today and taking time out of your training camp to chat with us. And, obviously talking about, the amateur versus pro is a big topic for us to talk about. But also, your upcoming fight on January 26th at the casino here in Moncton, New Brunswick for the Elite One Bitter Rivals card. So Justin, once again, we thank you for joining us, and we want to thank Troy's Roofing and Construction for presenting today's interview with Justin Ley. Call Troy at Troy's Roofing, 506-693-TROY, where the customer comes first and they do the job right the first time. Once again, Justin, we thank you for being on the show.